Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to our webinar. I'm just going to briefly introduce myself. My name is Madina. I am a licensed mental health therapist at NoCD. For those of you who don't know me, I do see members at NoCD, and I also do a lot of the clinical advising. So I help train and onboard the new therapists. So we are getting you guys the best care possible. So what we'll be doing tonight is I'll be going through some of your questions that you guys have, so you can go ahead and drop any questions you have about ERP, OCD, NoCD. You can drop them below, and I will try my best to get through as many of them as I can. And just a friendly reminder, these webinars are definitely not a substitute for therapy. So if you feel like you are struggling with OCD or you do wish to seek treatment, I would strongly encourage that you visit our website, treatmyocd.com. You can schedule a free 15-minute phone consultation and set up an appointment. You can also download our app. It's free in the App Store. So lots of cool tools on that app that you can use, and it's free to everyone. We also have an opportunity to join community support groups. So these are groups that consist of other people who also have OCD. So it's meant to be a support group, and it's facilitated by one of our great therapists at NoCD. And you do not have to be enrolled with NoCD to actually attend the group. So it's definitely a great opportunity. So if anyone doesn't have the app, I would strongly encourage downloading it. But without further ado, let me start answering some of these questions. Okay. What is your opinion on exposures becoming compulsions? So this is a great question, because I am a firm believer that anything can become a compulsion. So typically the biggest indicators for me that someone is doing a exposure as a compulsion is a sense of urgency. So if someone feels like they need to get rid of their anxiety, like I need to do my exposure to get rid of this anxiety, and it's performed in a very urgent way, then that can typically signal that it is a compulsion, because the aim of the exposure at that point is they're trying to get rid of the anxiety. And although ERPs or exposures oftentimes do help reduce our anxiety, that is not always the ultimate goal. So if you're doing an exposure in attempts to get rid of your anxiety or to significantly reduce it, if that is your only goal, it could likely be a compulsion. So that is kind of what I would suggest looking out for if there's a sense of urgency. Even when I have people do, like, if I have them do a script or a response prevention message, if they are saying it very, very fast, I'll usually tell them to slow down, because typically, again, that sense of urgency is a signal that the exposure is now being used as is actually a compulsion. And I always like to remind all my members that there are a lot of different ways to practice ERP, and it doesn't always have to be such a rigid way of doing it. To me, one of the best ERPs is that you guys are living your life even though you have doubts and fears. It doesn't always look like that formal practice. Sometimes it does. But even that in itself, like choosing to go do the activity with your friends, for example, instead of ruminating, might be the exposure. It might not necessarily be sitting down and doing that formal piece. So. Okay. How do you differentiate between intrusive thoughts and your own? So I would say your intrusive thoughts are your own thoughts. I honestly would probably suggest that you don't spend too much time on trying to parse through the difference, because that in itself kind of sounds like a compulsion, like trying to figure out which thoughts are which. Really, at the end of the day, probably the best way to approach this is to just recognize that as a human, you're going to have all sorts of thoughts. Intrusive thoughts, by definition, are thoughts that are identified by the person as unwanted and distressing. And that's really the big difference between someone who has OCD and someone who doesn't. So someone without OCD will have a thought that might be perceived as intrusive, but by a person who has OCD, but the person without OCD doesn't necessarily find the thought particularly stressful or antagonizing. So that would be the big difference by definition. But again, I think I would really encourage you to not even spend too much time on trying to parse out the difference between those two. Intrusive thoughts, though, will likely cause some distress. Okay. How long does it take ERP to become effective? Does it work well with medication? So it's definitely a case by case, it's definitely case by case. Like I couldn't give you a definitive answer on this. I will say at NoCD, our protocol is 9 weeks long, and we do typically see a 25 to 40% reduction in the members' scores. So if that gives you a little bit of framework. I will say, though, typically when I'm treating people, I will see that they start to kind of understand some of the nuances and the ideas behind ERP pretty quickly. Especially if it's practiced with the guidance of a therapist typically, and with the follow through of the member. So making sure that you are consistently doing your ERPs in between your sessions. I think ERP can be really effective. If you look at the research, it's really effective, specifically for OCD. But yeah, it would definitely be case by case for the first piece of your question. And then does it work well with medication? So again, another case by case example. I have seen people get better with and without medication in conjunction with ERP. So you can kind of take that info with however you would like. But yeah, I've seen symptom reduction in both cases. My stance is always less medication is best, just because obviously with medication there can be a lot of side effects. That is not me saying that medication isn't helpful in certain circumstances, but that would just kind of be my overall stance. Okay. Oh, I think I skipped one. Here we go. Sorry. Okay. Hi, I can get rid of panic for a second, then it surges back with the next thought. How do I stay consistent? How do I not get lost in the thoughts? Yeah, so I would probably guess that's OCD's way of trying to stay on top. So when you address your initial thoughts or feelings with ERP properly, it wouldn't be uncommon for OCD to kind of come back with something new or different to kind of trip you up, because it wants to, like I said, stay on top. So I would just say stay persistent. This is a really great opportunity for you to practice creating a different relationship with these thoughts and these feelings. Even though it's extremely hard, especially in the beginning, it's a new skill that you guys are learning. And with that being said, just giving yourself grace. I think one of the biggest slip ups, or I guess setbacks I see for a lot of people, is that they're bullying themselves into doing the ERP or being perfect at it. The goal is never perfection. The goal is that you're trying your best to do these exercises. So really just being encouraging with yourself. That still means that you're pushing yourself to do challenging things, but you don't have to be rude to yourself while you do it. So really just being encouraging with yourself to stay persistent, even though it feels like anxiety keeps throwing new things at you. And then for the last piece of the question, how do I not get lost in thought? It really makes me wonder if there's maybe over analysis of your thoughts, in the sense that I think we all kind of get lost in thoughts from time to time. I obviously don't know how frequently this is happening for you, but I wouldn't want the goal, again, here to be perfection. I wouldn't want you to think the goal is that you never get lost in your thoughts. All of us will zone out from time to time. So even maybe just taking a really close look at some of the goals you have set for yourself, because again, it's not uncommon for people to set some of these unrealistic goals as far as what their symptom reduction should look like. And I would argue that's OCD setting the goals, because OCD loves setting goals that are not attainable, and that's what keeps you stuck in the cycle. So yeah, just being gentler with yourself, staying persistent, and recognizing that you are going to get lost in your thoughts from time to time. Again, goal is not perfection. All right. Uh-oh. I went all the way to the bottom. Sometimes you really would think I'm like a grandma with technology. All right. Okay. Okay. How to stop mental compulsions like rumination and rationalizing. So this might not be a popular opinion, but it's making the conscious effort to slow down and to choose not to do the compulsion. With that being said, I know that that's not easy, and there are definitely some skills and tools I can talk about, but I really personally like to instill a type of ownership with our thoughts, right? Or our behavior, not our thoughts, with our behaviors. So really empowering yourself that you can make the decision to or not to do your compulsion. Some of my favorite ways to address mental compulsions is to ask yourself in the moment, what am I scared of? And then just tack on the front of that, there's a chance, right? So if I'm scared that I'm going to get hit by a car today, I could repeat a phrase like, there's a chance I could get hit by a car. And I would repeat that over and over and over. So there's a few things I'm trying to teach myself here. The first thing is I can handle uncomfortable things. Obviously, thinking the thought I could get hit by a car is not the most comfortable thought to have. So it evokes a sort of discomfort within me. And as I'm repeating it over and over again, I'm starting to learn that I can handle that discomfort, because it starts to kind of get old, right? If we repeat something over and over again, it becomes boring, becomes another set of words, really. And it also teaches you, like I said, that you can handle uncomfortable things. The big thing that I think is important that you're learning here is that your thoughts do not equate to reality or action or truth, right? So I could sit here all night long and say I'm a millionaire, but I wouldn't necessarily become a millionaire. In fact, I don't think that's how it works. That would be nice if it worked that way, but I don't think that is how the world works. So most of us logically know that that's not how the world works. We can't speak ourselves into being a millionaire. But anxiety likes to convince us that other thoughts that are more precious to us have more truth, right? So saying something kind of releases the power that anxiety wants to have over that thought. So if I say something, does it actually come true? Let's test it out. Like, I'm willing to test that hypothesis with all my members. Let's say your fear. Let's say it over and over again. And does it now all of a sudden happen? Does avoiding saying things happen? Does avoiding saying things avoid or prevent them from happening? Does avoiding thinking about things prevent them from happening? And just kind of like almost using it as an experiment here, like, do my thoughts and my feelings equate to truth or action, or are they just thoughts and feelings? So again, repeating some sort of, we call it a response prevention message to ourselves. So it's a message that is meant to be uncomfortable, and it's meant to show you that thoughts and feelings don't have to mean truth. It's this concept of thought action fusion. So just because I think something or say something doesn't mean that it's true. And again, you can test it out with other parts of your life as well. I mean, all of you could test it out now. You can think of something random. I think Dr. McGrath always uses the example, my ceiling is going to collapse on me by the end of the webinar, and I'll say it too. I've actually had, I will die in a car crash written down on a notepad for months now, I think, and shockingly, I haven't actually died in a car crash. So again, it's just teaching yourself that these thoughts don't have to mean anything. Mm-hmm. All right. How do you get over guilt and regret after doing a compulsion? So this is an interesting one. I think it's a great time to point out some of the holes in OCD's logic. OCD says, do this compulsion. It's going to help you avoid feeling something uncomfortable, right? But then typically people will come back and say something like this, right? Maybe they feel guilty or regretful that they're doing their compulsion. So really, we didn't successfully avoid anything. We're still feeling some sort of uncomfortable emotion. I can also apply it to most of the people. Everyone who's coming to see me is obviously uncomfortable, right? But again, OCD has lied and said, do your compulsion so you don't feel uncomfortable, yet you're sitting here with a therapist, right? So it's this lie that OCD has created for you guys, saying that you're going to successfully avoid something. But nothing is ever successfully avoided because it's impossible to avoid uncomfortable emotions. So I want to even suggest that you try to get over the guilt and regret. I would suggest that you lean into the guilt and the regret. And anyone who comes to any of my lives on Instagram knows I say this all the time. And I truly believe it. And I'm super passionate about it. And I love teaching you guys this concept because I really, truly feel like it's the only way to live. Because again, you can't avoid these emotions. So the next best option is to learn to create a different relationship with those emotions. And instead of viewing them as bad emotions, can we just view them as emotions? Catch yourself. All of us have a tendency to label our emotions or experiences or our thoughts as good or bad. And really learning to step away from those labels can be really helpful because once you label something as bad, there's going to be a natural inclination to try to get rid of that or to change that. And as soon as you label something as good, there's going to be a desire to want to hold on to that. And it's not to say that we can't, I'm not saying you have to love feeling guilty or regretful, but what I'm saying is, can you accept it as part of what it means to be human? I hope you feel guilt and regret, to be honest. I hope all of us on this call feel that, because if we didn't, that would honestly be very concerning. We want to feel those emotions. So instead of trying to push them away or get rid of them, or even to understand them, can we just let them be there and let them pass on their own? Similar to how we're doing that with our thoughts as well. Good questions, everyone. I always joke that every time I come on to a live, it's like an ERP for me. I'm super nervous in the beginning, and then once I start talking to a blank screen, well, not a blank screen, just a screen on my face, it becomes easier and easier over time. ERP. Okay. Okay. Contamination with food and medicine ERP. So I'm going to have to take some guesses at this. I don't know exactly what your fears are, but I would encourage you to, I don't know, this one's a little bit tricky to answer with this information. Maybe if you put some more info down below, I can answer a little bit more effectively. I hope that that's okay. I'm going to go to another one. But yeah, definitely put more info down below so I can answer it for you. Okay. Do you guys treat scrupulosity in Islam? Yes, we treat all subtypes of OCD, so definitely reach out to us. Like I mentioned in the beginning, if you weren't here, you can visit treatmyocd.com and you can set up a free 15-minute phone consultation. Definitely, we have therapists that can help you in that. So please contact us. Okay. How can I minimize catastrophizing? Cannot talk tonight. I would argue I can never talk. I feel like I say that all the time to every single member I see. It is really difficult to get anything accomplished, even simple stuff like doing the dishes or cleaning my bed. It's difficult to get out of my head. So the best way to minimize this is to stop trying to figure out how to minimize it and to get up and do the things, right? Easier said than done, I know. But I think this is like a fallacy that all of us, I would even say OCD or not, we fall into, right? We think a lot about things. And I'm willing to bet thinking about doing the simple things or why you can't do the simple things isn't actually the best way to do those things. The best way to do those things is to get up and do those things, even though you don't want to. So this sounds like maybe more so some depressive like symptoms. And I would honestly, and maybe I think I probably have ERP goggles on, but I think it's really helpful. Very similar with ERP, behavioral activation, which is very commonly used to treat depression. And you'll see depressive like symptoms very commonly with anxiety disorders, but behavioral activation is essentially ERP, just in different terms, and vice versa, right? So even though you feel depressed, you get up and you do the dishes, right? Even though you feel anxious, you get out and you drive in your car, right? And I think I talk a lot about the fears and the values list. So anyone who hasn't done this, if you would like to participate, it might be fun to get a piece of paper out or a Word document and to write down. Actually, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts below if you do this, but to write down your top 3 values and your top 3 fears. And the reason I want you guys to do this is it can be really helpful to guide your decisions and your behaviors. Anxiety and even depression, a lot of times, or depressive like symptoms, want us to act out of our fears, right? And I want you so badly to act out of your values because the fears are going to be there inevitably. So I'd rather you live your life and still have fear, uncertainty, and discomfort versus living what anxiety wants you to live and still have fear, uncertainty, and discomfort. Because again, we're not successfully avoiding anything. If anyone knew how to avoid these uncomfortable emotions, we would live in a very different world. But again, that's just not the reality. So even just writing down your values and your fears maybe might help you in understanding like, hey, like I just need to get up and I need to do it. Even just doing a small thing at a time can also be helpful. So instead of thinking of everything that needs to be done, think of one small thing you can do. And then from there, take it from there, right? You do 5 dishes. Maybe you want to lay back down, or maybe you decide that you have a little bit of energy now and you're ready to do the rest of the dishes in the sink. So take it one step at a time, and all of us on this call should try our best to align more with the value side versus the fear side. Okay. Hello, I recently got some help. I've been doing better. I've had to transition back home and I'm struggling and afraid to fall back where I was at. Any thoughts on moving forward with a little support? Well, I'm really glad to hear that you're doing better and you are, yeah. I'm glad to hear that you're doing better. Little support can definitely be a scary thing, especially if you have had guidance along your recovery journey. But I see this so commonly. As soon as someone starts to feel better, of course, OCD wants to swoop in and steal the party and wants to say, but what if you get bad again? What if you get worse again? What if you go back to square one again? All the what ifs followed by all the worst case scenarios. And I'm always the bearer of bad news. And I say, things won't always feel this great. And I'm going to retract that. I don't think it's the bearer of bad news. I think it's the bearer of reality. I'll hear this all the time. People tell me, Tina, I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Well, yeah, of course, the other shoe will drop at some point. But gosh, I would hate for you to miss right now that currently feels good because you're wondering when and if the other shoe is going to drop. So this goes back to learning to trust yourself. So anxiety disorders love to doubt your ability to manage. We are very resilient human beings. I say it all the time. Everyone on this call has been through something really difficult. And shockingly, you've gotten through it. Not saying it was easy, but you got through it. You managed. And so learning to trust yourself that when you do have a time that doesn't feel as great as now, that you will handle it at that moment. I promise you that thinking about if you're going to get worse at some point in the future isn't the best way to figure that out. I want you to live your current life, what's currently happening, and I'm not really concerned with you living this hypothetical what if life. So yeah, there is a chance that, you know, your symptoms go back to square one or whatever the fear is. Again, you can sit with the chance that could happen, because anything could happen. But you're not trying to figure it out. You're not trying to prevent it from happening. And you're believing in yourself that you're going to be able to handle it when it does happen. You clearly have the skills, right? You've gotten better. So trust that you'll still be able to implement them when things aren't feeling as carefree or smooth. So good luck with that. How do I stop anxiety about anxiety? Yes, so I see this all the time, like ruminating about ruminating or feeling anxious about feeling anxious. And it's this self-fulfilling prophecy that so often you see with anxiety disorders. The very thing that you're trying to avoid or not have happen, anxiety's actually created a perfect platter for that thing to happen. So I even think about like sleep is a very big thing for so many people. People are worrying about if they're going to get good sleep. And then coincidentally, well, actually not even coincidentally, of course they're not getting good sleep because they're worrying about if they're going to sleep well. And again, I said it a couple of times already tonight, but I think it's a really useful statement to just even implement in your kind of headspace. Is the best way to figure out this is not by worrying about it. And again, I would address the word stop, right? I don't want you to stop your anxiety. I want you to notice that you have anxiety, but I don't want you to engage in all the time, right? Um, there's a huge difference between noticing your thoughts and trying to control your thoughts. And I think sometimes the lines can get blurred, and it can definitely be a tricky skill. But if I had to describe it, the best way I can describe it is that the initial thought just pops in. So for so many of you, the intrusive thought isn't something that you had to think about thinking of. It just popped into your head. You probably did not want it to be there. It just like kind of came in, right? That's the initial thought that you cannot control. Everything after that you conjured up, that you've created this storyline to, that's all rumination. That's a compulsion. So even just and the same goes for the emotion, right? The emotion of anxiety coming in isn't something you can control. Again, I hope you do feel anxious from time to time. Now, the aftermath, why do I feel anxious? How come this is going on? How do I get it to go away? All of that is probably why you're having the anxiety about anxiety versus, oh, there's that emotion again. I'm familiar with that. I know I can handle it. And I also know that it won't last for forever, and I don't have to do anything to make it go away. Which I think is a really important lesson for all of us to learn. If you look at the research, emotion actually only lasts 90 seconds. But if you're finding that it's lasting longer than 90 seconds, it's because you've created some sort of storyline to it. And that's what's kind of perpetuating that emotion or that thought or that sensation. So the anxiety about the anxiety. So I would encourage you to not try to stop the anxiety, to let the anxiety be there, but not try to figure out how to get it to go away or why it's there. And I see this really commonly too. It's like, Madina, I don't know why I feel anxious. And I kind of joke. I'm like, well, do we have to know why? Like, you're human. Like, I hope you feel anxious. Now, I think we're creating it more into the clinical land because now we're worrying about why we have anxiety. I was actually just talking to a colleague about this. Like, of course, there are a lot of you struggling with OCD. I think also along the lines of that, there's a lot of over pathologizing going on. A lot of the things that you guys are doing or finding yourself doing are technically things that all of us as humans do, but you've kind of categorized yourself into this box of like, this isn't normal. Why is this here? How come I'm thinking this way? I'm so horrible. Versus again, recognizing that as humans, we all have all sorts of thoughts, feelings, emotions, sensations, all these things. For example, someone was trying to tell me like they were zoning out. And I challenged them to see like we all zone out. I don't know if that really is the issue or the issue was more so him trying to figure out why he was zoning out versus normalizing the experience. And I think, again, that goes back so strongly to being kinder with yourself on this process. Like everything that you're doing isn't like, oh my God, I'm crazy. That's not going to help you get into a position where you can change, right? You can understand that there are certain behaviors that are going on that you're not too fond of. But yeah, making sure that we're not over pathologizing things that are technically part of the human experience. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. I feel like constantly thinking, having thoughts about hurting myself or my children is just who I am, and that scares me so much. Is that intrusive thoughts or ruminating? I don't understand. Well, first off, I'm definitely sorry to hear that this is going on, and it sounds very stressful for sure. So I'll definitely validate that first off. And second off, the big difference between someone who actually wants to do something and someone who fears doing something are two separate things. So fearing that something could happen or you could do something is not the same as saying, hey, I want to do that. Which I'm sure some of you are on the call thinking, but how do I know that, right? How do I know that I don't actually want to do it? Which again is just another way of OCD trying to doubt. So I guess if this can give you any sort of like psychoeducation, if you're fearing that this could happen, yes, that is an intrusive thought. The fact that you're telling me that you're distressed by it and you don't understand and you put this crying emoji would signal that. And I'm trying to do this slightly because I'm not trying to teeter into the reassurance land, but more so just the psychoeducation. Because I think there is a lot of misconceptions on what OCD is. So the bulk of it is there is a huge difference between fearing that you could do something and actually wanting to do something. And Monica, definitely reach out for help. If you have not already, again, visit our website, treatmyocd.com if you're not already linked with a therapist. Because yes, these thoughts are definitely not fun to live with when you have OCD. So okay. If you are just living and only doing in the moment exposures and not planning exposures, is this good for your OCD or should you always do some planned exposures? Good question. I would say just switch it up as much as you can. So I would do a handful of in the moment ones and a handful of purposeful ones. So ones where you're purposely triggering yourself. I think it doesn't hurt to do both. I would definitely be curious why you're not doing any formal exposures. I don't know if that's OCD's way of trying to climb back on top and get you to not practice. Like if you're purposely trying to avoid because it's just uncomfortable. I think the other big thing I see is people are, this is another example why OCD is never satisfied, but you'll see either people are feeling good and they don't want to practice their exposures, or they're feeling bad and they don't want to practice their exposures. So on the one end, well, Madina, I feel good. I don't want to ruin it by doing an ERP. And then on the other end, well, I'm just feeling so crappy. I don't have the energy to do ERP. So I think just, again, making sure you address some of those fallacies, because it's, again, a good depiction on how OCD is never satisfied no matter what. OCD is never going to say, you know what? It's such a good time to do ERP. It's always going to have an excuse. And so always challenging yourself to do your ERPs, even when it feels like conditions aren't perfect, because again, OCD is never going to tell you that conditions are perfect. So yeah, I would just make sure that I'm practicing in as many different sorts of ways as you can. Can't hurt. Okay. Is sexual orientation OCD real? I don't know what you mean by is it real? It is a subtype. So anyone who doesn't know, sexual orientation OCD is a fear that you're not the sexual orientation that you thought you were, which can feel very real. We can definitely talk about that. I hear that as one of the biggest barriers when I have someone who's not successfully resisting their compulsion. I'll ask them what's getting in the way, and they'll say, Madina, it feels so real. And I will sit here and validate to the nth degree that it feels real. Of course, it feels real. It wouldn't be a disorder if it didn't feel real. But the whole crux of this is that we're teaching you guys that you can handle things that feel very real. Again, because something feels real doesn't mean that it is. I can go back to my millionaire example. I could feel like a millionaire, but it doesn't mean that I'm actually going to be a millionaire, right? And yeah, so in some, I guess it can feel very real. And yes, it's a real subtype. Hopefully that answers the question. Okay. Okay, what can I do about getting over being upset by the sounds of doors slamming? I hear this door all day and it's ruining my quality of life. So I would first off ask you what's the fear around the door slamming? I don't know if there's a fear or if it's just a fear that you're not going to be able to pay attention, which again is that self-fulfilling prophecy. So asking yourself what the fear behind it is might help you kind of be able to sit with that response prevention message that I was talking about earlier. And even if it is a fear that you're not going to be able to pay attention, there's a chance I'm not going to be able to pay attention, or there's a chance that I'm not going to be able to enjoy my life. This example really reminds me of something that I think about a lot of you guys, like my members, when I'm not with you, because I think that a lot of you guys teach me things too. And ERP is definitely something that I think is a lifestyle and I think is applicable for, is helpful for everyone. And I think I truly try to live my life in a similar way. But I was in yoga the other day and it was the end of class, and anyone who's been to yoga knows that you do this really hard sequence and then at the end you get to just lay down and relax and meditate and just be really peaceful, right? And so I was so excited. We got down to our final rest pose, and very quickly, as soon as the teacher left, people started talking and it got really loud in there. And I found myself being kind of upset, right? That there was all these like distractions around and like, oh my God, like I just want to relax. Why are these people talking? And then I realized that conditions are not going to always be perfect. And I know I kind of mentioned that earlier, but I think you can really kind of apply it to this situation too, right? It's almost as if I think I'm hearing you say that you want the conditions to be perfect. You don't want to hear the door slamming. I don't know why the door is slamming, but for whatever reason, it is slamming. For whatever reason, the people in the yoga class were talking, and I could not change that. So I had two options. I could either be upset that people were talking, or I could lean into that and realize that I can still try my best to enjoy the meditation or enjoy my quality of life, even though there was something that was trying to pull my energy away from it. And so I think you can really apply it, hopefully, to the door slamming. If the door is going to slam regardless and you don't have control over it, seeing if you can still try your best to live your life, even though there's that kind of annoyance or thing in the background. So. Mm-hmm. How should I tell my mom I want to get tested for OCD because I'm having symptoms that are impeding my life? So this is a tricky one just because I don't know the relationship you have with your mom, or your parents, or, you know, whoever you want to ask to get permission for this. But yeah, if you don't feel comfortable disclosing the exact details of the OCD, because I know that there can be a lot of shame and guilt around some of the thoughts, I wonder if you just kind of tell her that you're having a difficult time and you would like to talk to someone, and you can, like I've mentioned before, certainly reach out to Treat My OCD, and we can kind of help set you up, or we can help set you up with an assessment. Yeah, so if you don't feel comfortable disclosing the details, you know, vaguely, you know, telling her that you're not feeling very well and you would like to talk to someone. And then, yeah, it's impacting your quality of life. I'm willing to bet mom probably notices, and might be waiting for you to come tell her. I mean, again, I don't know the relationship you have with your mom, but I would definitely suggest to try to communicate as best as you can based on the relationship you have with her. So I hope that you get the help that you need. All right. ERP for existential OCD or dissociation. So existential OCD can kind of be summed up in this fear that, you know, the world's not real, which a lot of times can go hand in hand with feeling like you're dissociating or zoning out, or kind of this somatic experience for a lot of people is what they kind of report to me. So there's lots of different ways you can do imaginary scripts. So imagining that the world were not real, watching simulations, leaning into any sort, not even leaning into, just being aware that you have sensations, but they don't have to equate to meaning again. So a lot of times when people are experiencing some symptoms around association, it's like, oh my God, I kind of feel like it's a little bit fuzzy. I'm like, is that salt shaker bottle over there real? And just being like super aware of their surroundings versus actually engaging in their life, because they're kind of almost testing to see if the world is real. And honestly, you're going based off the same data that all of us are going off of, that we trust that everything that's happening is happening. It's the only reality that we know. But there is a chance that we're all living in a simulation. This could be a simulation right now. I don't know. Maybe I'm being simulated to answer these questions. That could be a possibility. But again, the best way to figure that out is not to think about it, because if we could satisfy that question, if that could be satisfied, you would have the answer. And again, I think that is the trick that OCD tries to play on so many of you, is trying to convince you that you can get closer, that you're problem solving, that you can find out the answer, so you can finally become more certain or feel better about life. But you can't. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say on that one. Okay. Oops. All right, I'm going to try to answer some people's questions that I haven't answered. So there's another question on existential OCD. Yeah, intrusive thoughts can definitely be very overwhelming. Yeah, existential is a hard one, because again, it's this fear that the world is not real. I think it can be paired with a lot of depression or feeling very depressed, and then also a lot of harm. Like, do I want to harm myself now because I'm feeling depressed? And what's the meaning of life? It's very intertwined. And so I'll kind of revert back to something I mentioned earlier as far as like behavioral activation. So making sure that you're getting up and you're living your life, even though it could be completely fake, right? Again, you're going based off the same data that everyone else has. And we don't know if the world is real or not. But I want you to live your life. I want you to follow your values and your fears list. And yeah, accept that they feel overwhelming too. You are going to have thoughts and feelings that are very overwhelming. And I will tell you this, it won't last for forever. A very popular mantra is, this too shall pass, whether it be applied to thoughts or feelings or sensations. So you can definitely try to implement that. But I guess my big suggestion would be to continue to get up and do the things you enjoy doing, even if they don't bring you as much joy as they normally do, or you fear that, like, what's the point type of mentality. I would still suggest that you keep getting up and keep doing it and try your best to resist your rumination on this fear by sitting with the chance that, yeah, this world may not be real. And I think, just as like kind of a sidebar a little bit, is just remembering that try your best not to use logic when it comes to OCD. I've mentioned before that OCD resides in a place in the brain that doesn't understand language. So when you try to talk yourself out of something that's scary, it doesn't really work very well with OCD. And that's why ERP is really effective. It's because we are addressing the issues from a behavioral approach, or the thoughts from a behavioral approach. So we're showing you out of your fear. Versus trying to talk ourselves out. So even saying something like, no, I know the world is real, might help alleviate your anxiety for a little bit. Or maybe you ask your friend, like, do you think the world is real? Or maybe you watch a video that like reassures you that the world is real. All of that won't be super helpful because it's just feeding into the fear. Now, if you do the opposite of what the fear wants you to do, fear doesn't want you to go live your life, because what's the point? It's not real. So if you do the opposite of it, say you go out and you ride your bike and you enjoy your time with your friends, fear kind of shrivels under those circumstances, because it's like, well, if the world's not real, why are they going around living life like it's real, right? So even just thinking about like when you treat OCD, I think of the behavior piece, like just pay attention to your behaviors. Well, not just, but predominantly pay attention to your behaviors. OCD is paying so much attention to the way you behave. And that's why you'll see with so many people who have OCD, they'll say, logically, I know that this doesn't make any sense, right? But I just feel, and then it'll be followed by some sort of worst case scenario. And that's because they've been trying to talk themselves out of their fears versus showing themselves out of their fears. Okay. Okay. I'm going to take a drink break. Yeah, I was really fascinated by this cup. You guys can't see. It changes, the color of it changes with temperature. It was all like rainbowy earlier when I put cold water in here. The fun facts that none of you probably want to know while I search for this question. Okay. How could you use ERP if most of your compulsions are mental? Yeah, ERP is really applicable to mental compulsions. I actually just assume that all of my members are doing mental compulsions, even if they don't really tell me, just because I think rumination is so common. So it's the same I was talking about earlier. I don't know if you were here, Matt, but using response prevention messages by sitting with the chance that anything could happen. Again, we're really trying to allow ourselves to have unwanted thoughts, but not try to go down the rabbit hole with those thoughts. So whatever it is that you're fearing, you could say there's a chance. You could even say it in the definitive, which for a lot of people can be really scary, right? So if I were to sit here and say, I am a murderer, does that now all of a sudden mean I'm a murderer? Or does that mean I just said those words? So even saying it in the definitive can really get you I don't even want to say comfortable. It can get you to a position where you feel uncomfortable and you teach yourself that you can handle it. Another thing I really like to do with mental compulsions is just keep redirecting yourself back to the task at hand. Rumination is a compulsion. I don't know if you guys listen to that podcast by Michael Greenberg. He has like a few series on the OCD Stories podcast, but he talks about, I'm going to lose my train of thought with that one. Yeah, I'll probably remember tonight at 2 a.m. when I can't sleep, but yeah, I lost my thought with that one. But in any case, I want you to try your best not to go down the rabbit hole with with the rumination, because that is a big thing that people get stuck on, is I need to figure this out. Even addressing the positive beliefs we have about our compulsions. I think people with OCD, they have a lot of positive beliefs about their compulsions that they're actually helpful. And the biggest thing I see is rumination makes them feel like they're either problem solving or they're not being negligent. So really just like thinking about that for a second, because you worry more about something, does it really mean you're any more or less negligent, or does it mean you just took an hour out of your day to think about something? So yeah, hopefully those two statements are helpful. That's really going to bug me that I don't remember what I was going to say, but if you guys come back, maybe I'll remember. All right, let's see, what else do we got here? How can you identify what your values are? So a lot of times when I have members do this, they kind of say the same thing to me, like, oh God, I'm having such a hard time trying to figure out what my values are. And I think that if you're having a hard time figuring out what your values are, it might be a good indication that so many of your behaviors have been based off of your fears, right? Fears have overtaken some of your values. I think a really good, and this is kind of just what I think in my head, it's not like scientifically backed or anything, but go back to what you used to, like how you used to be when you were a kid, and those things that brought you joy. Like I know for me, sometimes I'm like, I don't even know like what I like to do other than work and work out, right? But if I think about back to a kid, I really like doing like drawing and stuff. But I think a lot of that is lost as we get older. Fears become stronger, and we kind of have like preconceived notions on how we should be as adults. So sometimes just even reverting to your childhood and kind of looking at some of the things that you really enjoy doing can help you understand what your values are. Also, just what your day consists of. Like, what did you do today? Was probably could be some of your values as well. Did you talk to your mom on the phone for an hour, right? Family is probably a value. Did you meditate? If you meditate, maybe mental health is a value. And, obviously try to be a little bit more specific, well, as specific as you can. So hopefully that is helpful. Oops. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like this. It's not really a question, but trying not to give thoughts value. Yeah, another way I like to phrase it is I try not to assign meaning to my thoughts or my feelings or my sensations, because that's what anxiety wants you to do. It wants you to spend hours and hours trying to do physical or mental things to figure out like meaning or value. Also, like your thoughts don't mean anything about your morality. I think that's another big thing I see with OCD is like, does this mean I'm a bad person? I must be so horrible for thinking in this way. Again, going back to judgment versus normalizing and less over pathologizing. Like everyone has thoughts like this. Pretty much every single thought that my members have had, I've had at one point or another. I don't have OCD, but that just gives you a good depiction of how the human mind works. The human mind just comes up with creative thoughts. And they don't always have to have meaning. And also just even, I do enjoy personifying the OCD a bit because again, it's like that fears and values separation. And when we separate the OCD a little bit, I think it helps you decide that you're not going to make decisions based off what anxiety wants you to make decisions based off. You're going to make decisions based off what you want to make decisions based off, even though there's that fear there that's kind of hovering over you, trying to dictate the decision. So I agree. Okay, let's do a few more. How can I accept I have OCD instead of fantasizing about how much better my life would be without OCD? And I know someone else kind of made a similar comment. Oh, it was you, Matthew, that made the other similar comment. Yeah, so I read this quote the other day, and some of you maybe have heard it before, but it goes along the lines of it never goes away until it's taught you what you need to know. It meaning the uncomfortable thing. And I think that that's really true, because the more we fight up against something, the more it becomes kind of like in the forefront. I think a lot of you have probably heard of the pink elephant exercise. If I tell you not to think of a pink elephant, that's going to be the first thing that probably pops into your mind. And so I think really accepting the reality of it, and along those lines, accepting the reality of having OCD is also accepting that it sucks at times, right? And that you don't have to love having it, but recognizing that wishing you didn't have it doesn't necessarily help the situation. And I also think, and I've said this before, I think in my last last live, was something that I noticed working with OCD is that you guys care a lot. You guys are people that are very careful, and that is pretty awesome, right? Obviously the volume on it, it's turned up a little bit too much. So we want to turn the volume down on it so it's not so interfering in your life. But there are a lot of good pieces to who you are as a person. So I think also just including that versus, oh, I wish that this wasn't the reality, and I wish I didn't have this, and I feel crazy. Again, you can have all those feelings, you can validate all those things. But fighting up against it's not going to be helpful. So yeah, I will definitely validate that it's definitely not the most ideal situation to have. But with that being said, also ERP has been found to be very effective. I've seen lots of people come back to kind of what I would say like minimal to little symptoms. And again, I think that is kind of the end of the light at the end of the tunnel. Is you'll still have those intrusive thoughts and those uncomfortable emotions and that uncertainty, but you just know how to manage it better now because you have the skills and the tools. I also just think it's insightful that you recognize that you're doing that. So just that's a little bit of a side note. I don't know. Let me try to find your question again. NEK. I don't. Okay. I don't like exposure. School is around the corner, and I hate the fact that my kids will be with other students passing germs. I just started ERP in school is less than a month away. Yeah, so that anticipatory anxiety. Yeah, I'm willing to bet that if school wasn't starting in a month, there'd be something else that OCD would be latching on to is, oh my God, there's this thing coming up and I have to worry about it. A word that I've really been liking to use, a word that I really like to use is just the simple word wait. Let's just wait. Let's wait to see in a month what that situation is like versus trying to figure out, because I'm guessing there's a lot of figuring out going with how you're going to manage and like what's it going to be like and how stressful and like who are the kids going to come in contact, like all this rumination leading up to the school situation. Not here to say the school situation won't be stressful, but I don't want you to live it twice. I just want you to live it when it happens. So I would just encourage you to focus on your ERP practice now and wait to see what school's like in a month. So yeah, and I think that's kind of a good note to leave on, I think, is this word wait. I really like to use it. I tell a lot of my members to use it because so much of suffering that we create for ourselves is by trying to figure out something that hasn't even happened yet. And so just telling yourself, like, let's wait, let's slow down. I'm not saying you have to be lax and not do anything planful. But we don't need to always be planning, and we can just wait. A lot of times, once we get to the situation, it wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be. So I don't know how to get rid of this thingy. I don't know. I guess I'll keep the question up. But I really enjoyed virtually hanging out with you guys tonight. It's always really fun, whether I'm on here or Instagram, to answer your guys' questions. I certainly do hope that they're helpful. And as I mentioned earlier at the very beginning, this is definitely not a substitute for therapy. So if you do feel like you're struggling, please reach out to us. We are live in all 50 states, UK, Australia, Canada. So make sure that you're reaching out. We are trying our best to expand in more and more regions, and also accepting more and more insurances so we can get you guys affordable care. And again, make sure you download our free app in the App Store, and use the tools on there as well. And yeah, I really, like I said, enjoyed hanging out with you guys. Those of you who know me know that I'm on Instagram on Mondays with Madina. I answer some of the stories. And typically I go live on Thursday evenings on the Instagram, and there's a couple Tuesdays I think I'm on this YouTube live. So if I didn't get to your question tonight, please come back to one of those opportunities, or not even necessarily with me, but with any of the lives and the webinars and things like that. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the night and end to the week, and I will talk to you guys soon.